Alrighty guys, it is Qaaman here today, and I'm bringing you another Dragon Ball Super segment for episode 6. And I know I'm a little bit late to the party, but considering the fact that the most recent video I uploaded gave me a lot of problems, it basically gave me HFIL because I had to re-render it so many times. The audio was messing up and I had to re-upload it several times, and also the fact that the video itself actually took a lot of editing. But I'm finally done with that, and before we get into this video today, I just want to show you something really cool here. I finally got my YouTube plaque. As you guys can see here, it actually has like Qaaman's Land on it. I actually made sure that I customized the name to put the little apostrophe, because my name is actually supposed to have an apostrophe in it, but Google wouldn't let me do it for whatever weird reason. But that's basically all I got for today. I have a little bit of an update at the end, so without wasting any more time, let's analyze the plot, the action, interesting details I observed, and my impressions and my overall thoughts on the episode as a whole. So without wasting any more time, let's get straight into this video. Now, let's first start off by talking about the plot. Now, in terms of this episode's plot, it was pretty straightforward. Beerus was going to interact with the characters, and it was basically trying to show a little bit of a backstory between King Vegeta, Vegeta, and Beerus, and I felt that that was much better portrayed in this episode than it was in Battle of Gods. And although Battle of Gods kind of just briefly showed, you know, Beerus putting his foot on King Vegeta, I felt this one was a lot more in depth, where he's asking for, you know, a better pillow and everything along those lines. So I definitely liked it more. They made Beerus look significantly more villainous, considering the fact that he was being so strict about such a minor thing. And I also like the little things that they added, you know, with the plot as a whole, by like showing Beerus interacting with other characters like Goten and Trunks, you know, spraying water on him, Beerus eating the wasabi. I liked everything along those lines, and I definitely feel like this episode did a much better job portraying Beerus's interaction with the characters as opposed to what Battle of Gods did, because they obviously have more time to do it in the actual show. So as far as the plot goes, I definitely think that this plot was significantly better in certain areas than it was in Battle of Gods because of the extra depth. Now, moving on to the action sequence of this episode, there actually is something to talk about here, where we actually saw Beerus fighting against Fat Boo near the end of the episode. The other action sequences really weren't actually fights. I mean, we saw, you know, Vegeta pulling the octopus out of the ocean, and we also saw that little quick scene where we saw Vegeta kind of charging at Beerus, and Beerus literally just looks at him and Vegeta falls to the ground. But the real action sequence was against Beerus and Fat Boo, and I will admit that I loved it. The animation looked fantastic. And in my honest opinion, I feel like we're finally getting back to that original Dragon Ball Z type of feeling, where we see like a character do something so out of the ordinary and like crazy to a character that it really entices you to watch the next episode. Like when we saw, you know, King Piccolo killing Shenron, or Frieza killing Krillin. Like all of these things really entice you for the next episode. And if you look at that episode, it did look like Fat Boo was evaporated from Beerus's blast. So I loved the action for this episode. It was really cool looking at like their stare down, and how Majin Buu, even though he was much weaker, definitely at least he stood his ground. And I definitely loved that part of this episode as a whole. So as far as the action is concerned, I thought this episode was fantastic, even if it was short-lived. Now, moving on to some interesting details, the first thing that I wanted to note is that in Dragon Ball Super, Vegeta's depicted as being a little bit more brave as opposed to what he was in Battle of Gods when confronting Beerus as a child. Because if you actually look at the scene from Battle of Gods, in which, you know, Beerus had his foot on top of King Vegeta, when Vegeta looked at it as a child in Battle of Gods, he just looked at it and just like stayed straight. But in Super, Vegeta actually rushed out to try and help his dad, which obviously shows that he's a lot more willing to confront Beerus. And ironically, he fell down the same exact way than he did years later, obviously in Super, where Vegeta tried to rush him on the ship and he fell down once again. So it's definitely showing Vegeta to be a lot more brave when confronting Beerus in Dragon Ball Super. So I definitely like that about his character. Now, the next interesting detail that I wanted to point out about this episode, kind of to my shock, is that we really didn't see anything in regards to the Pilaf gang really planning anything in this episode. And I really felt that from my episode 6 predictions that they would have a bigger role in this episode. I thought that this was going to feature them actually trying to get the Dragon Balls or do something along those lines. But considering the fact that next episode's called Don't Touch My Bulma, that's probably going to be the episode where everybody's going to fight Beerus, especially considering the preview where we actually saw them interacting with Beerus in terms of fighting. So because of that, that leads me to believe that the Pilaf gang really isn't going to do anything, and it's kind of sad. That's a little bit of a downer. I expected them to do a little bit with the plot, but you know, that's one thing that I was kind of shocked about, how they really didn't get almost any airtime this episode when this was the episode for them to actually do something as a whole. So that's another interesting detail. The last interesting detail that I noticed is more on the comical side of things, and I'm sure Thundershot probably noticed this too, is that they actually didn't put the bingo scene where Vegeta's actually playing bingo and dancing, and I didn't really expect them to really follow it the same way, but that was a very, very funny scene from Battle of Gods, and they kind of changed it around and actually made Vegeta like this chef out of nowhere, even though I've never seen Vegeta really do anything along the lines, in terms of cooking. I guess you could say we've seen him eating raw animals before, or raw creatures, but just the fact that Vegeta can literally just whip up like an octopus right off the bat was actually very funny. And I definitely like that little change that they made, so it's not exactly like Battle of Gods. So that's another interesting detail I noticed. Now, moving on to my impressions of this episode, I feel like this episode gave off two impressions. The two impressions that it gave off was, number one, being a reflective impression, and I say this because it kind of showed like that cold history that Vegeta has with Beerus, and it showed a lot of that scene where we saw how cold Beerus was to King Vegeta. So that's obviously showing that they have a lot of history going back together. So that's definitely one thing that it showed off because of the flashbacks. And the next thing that I noticed about this episode is that it gave off an impression of a comical effect, because it forced Vegeta to behave in ways that we as fans would never expect Vegeta to behave, similar to what we saw in Battle of Gods with him dancing at that bingo tournament. And in this case, he's obviously chopping up that octopus. So as a whole, I definitely liked that this episode kind of showed like two different types of feelings towards it. So those are my overall impressions as a whole for two different reasons. So guys, that has been my video for today. Overall, I'm gonna give this episode a 4-star rating because of the fact that I feel like this episode was significantly better than 3. It was astronomically better than 4. It was better than 5, obviously. 5 could have been a 4 too if it had better animation, but I like this episode because it had a little bit of action in conjunction with a lot of stuff that we haven't seen, like that scene where, you know, Beerus is obviously, you know, being a lot more strict to King Vegeta in this episode as opposed to what we saw in Battle of Gods. And I also like the little extra things they added with Beerus eating, you know, the wasabi, and, you know, go to the Trunks hitting him with that water gun. Everything along those lines that they did to make it a little bit different, especially considering the fact that it's already on the ship, made it somewhat refreshing to watch. And because of that, I felt that it was better than those, but it wasn't better than episode 1 and 2. And I definitely look forward to seeing episode 7, because we're definitely going to see probably a huge event take place with Vegeta. I'm going to save all of that for my predictions. So most importantly, over everything else, please remember to rate, comment, and subscribe. And remember, as I always say, to have a great day, guys, and stay tuned for Project Q, because I'm working on a huge project for you guys. Take care.